Video yesterday, I talked a little bit about the Negev desert in Israel. So now I just want to talk about deserts and tell you a few things about deserts and show you some really cool pictures and then show you a little art project that you can do. So you can watch, and I'm going to show you this book. I have this book called the Desert Alphabet Book. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to show you pictures and explain a couple of things. So you can see some very cool things that you find in the desert. So if you look at this book, first thing is it's showing you a frog. So believe it or not, there are certain frogs that live in a desert. They're desert frogs. And they live deep underneath the ground, underneath the sand. And kind of like the bears that hibernate during the winter, these frogs sleep during the hottest months. They sleep during the summer months, and it's called estivation, not hibernation, but estivation, and those are animals that sleep during the summer. And also, I just want to tell you that what makes a desert a desert? Sometimes they have sand, but maybe they don't always have sand. What makes a desert is any land that gets less than 10 inches of rain for the whole year. So if you measured the rain when it comes down, they measure it in inches. And so any place that has less than 10 inches is called a desert. So this is an Australian water-holding frog. You know what that is? That's a camel, and that's a Bactrian camel because it has two humps. This is a type of bird, a crimson chat. It's a type of bird that lives in the desert. So you might not even think that a bird lives in the desert. I'm also going to tell you that any animal or plant that lives in a desert has to be able to live without a lot of water. So anything that grows, anything that lives for a long time without water, saves the water in its body or in the plant, and it can grow and live in the desert. A different type of camel, a dromedary. The difference is this camel has, you see it, only one hump. An elf owl. The elf owl is the smallest owl in the whole world, and it lives usually inside a cactus. So there's a hole in the cactus and it lives in the cactus. F is for a fennec fox. It's a small fox that lives in some deserts. This is one of my favorites. The G is for the golden wheel spider. Well, you know what a cartwheel is. You've probably done cartwheels. This golden wheel spider likes to curl up into a ball and it rolls down the hills of sand to get from one place to another. It's also called a cartwheeling spider. So kind of neat that you have a spider that can roll into a little ball and roll down a sand hill. H is the head-standing beetle. This is also one of my favorite insects. He stands on his head, and then the one or two times when it rains, the water rolls down his body into his mouth. So he stands on his head and he drinks the water that way. I think that's really amazing. I is for the inland taipan. It's a type of snake. There are lots of snakes that live in a desert too. So that's one type. J is for a jerd. It's like a little mouse. It lives in certain kind of deserts also. Bet you didn't know that there are types of horses that live in a desert. This is called a kulan, and they run around. It's not a desert with the sand, but it's a desert that has some grass, but it doesn't really rain a lot, and this horse lives in that type of desert. L is for the livingstone. This is a type of cactus. They look like rocks so that animals don't think that they can eat it, and that's how it protects itself. M is for a meerkat, and I don't know if any of you have seen the Lion King, but there are meerkats in the Lion King, and they live in certain type of deserts, and they poke their heads up through the holes, And there's usually one who guards and will give a warning if a big animal comes to try to eat it, so all the other meerkats can run away. N is for a type of bird called the Namaqua sandgrouse. It's also a type of bird that lives in the desert. O is for oasis. Sometimes in the desert you could go for miles and miles and miles and miles and not have any water, and suddenly there's a little pool of water, and by the pool of water there's some palm trees that grow, and the animals will go and they'll get their water there, or people who live in the desert will find an oasis and they will get their water from an oasis as well. P is for the palmate gecko. Okay, so this gecko can hide in the sand and camouflage itself so that the other animals don't see it. So we see one here, we see one there, and there's one hiding. And if you look really close, you can see it right there. Those eyes peeking out through the sand. Q is for a quail thrush. It's a type of bird that also lives in the desert. So now we know there are birds that live in the desert and lizards that live and plants that grow. Lots of things that grow. It's not just sand. R is for the red racer, another type of snake that lives in the desert. It actually lives in the desert in America. S is for the Saguaro Cactus. It is the largest and tallest cactus in the entire world. It is huge. It grows very slowly. It almost looks like a tree. It's so large. T is for the tortoise. I'll bet you didn't know that there are turtles or tortoises that live in a desert, but this is a special desert tortoise. And it tries to eat some of the plants that grows, and it gets water from the plants. And now you know that there are some tortoises that don't live in the water, but they live in the desert. U is for the ursine skipper. It's a type of butterfly. So now we know a butterfly lives in the desert also. Not all butterflies, but certain kinds live in the desert. V is for the Vaquira. It's like a pig, but it only lives in the desert. Some people call it javelinas. And when they walk one behind another in a row. Like we try to get you to walk in school, one behind another. That's how they walk. They don't walk next to each other. They walk behind each other in a straight line. And I also happen to know, because I read about it, that vaquiras have a terrible smell. They really stink. And that's what keeps a lot of other animals away from it. X is for the xeris squirrel. It's a type of squirrel that lives in a desert. And if you look at the tail, it's a really long tail, and it uses it like an umbrella to keep the sun off of its head. So it gives it shade. So look at that tail. Y is for the yardang. What happens is there's rocks, big rocks that grow that are in the desert, and after a long time, the wind and sand goes against it and rubs it, and then it really turns into like a shape. It's a long, it can look like a statue of some point, but it's made out of rock in the desert. W is for welwitschia. It's a type of plant that grows in a desert. It can live so long that they have found some plants that live, that are 2,000 years old. 2,000 years old. And it just is amazing that it can live in a desert for so long with so little water. Z is for the zaita. It's a type of plant that lives in a desert, and it has beautiful flowers and beautiful leaves, and it just is able to live in a desert without a lot of water.